Mic check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K Collector. It is a rainy Saturday morning and it's a perfect day for gaming. So if you did have any plans of catching up on your backlog or maybe diving into something that you know takes a lot of time, maybe one of your long form RPGs, today is definitely the day to do it. But I wanted to start the day off by sharing a quick message and just sharing something that I'm noticing. I think that something very important is about to happen within the retro gaming community, and within the retro collecting community, and probably just within the gaming community in general. And that is, I'll just cut to the chase. I do think that the price of retro video games is about to rebound. And I do think that they could start to rise again and start to inflate again. And if you want to know why, I'll tell you a simple, short answer. And I've always said this before. This isn't a finance channel. We don't necessarily talk about finance here, but we do want to look at things that are going to impact the retro collecting community and how much we're going to have to pay for retro games. And for those of you who don't know, the Fed just announced that they are going to be cutting interest rates. And because of this information, the stock market has soared to a new record high, and everyone is getting ready for what's known as money printing or quantitative easing rather. Whenever the Fed goes through a cycle of quantitative tightening, which is what we're in now, it means that the money printing has turned off and there's not as much money to go around. That's what happens when they do quantitative tightening. But when they do quantitative easing, that means that money is going to become easier. It's going to become easier to borrow money. Credit will be easier. Interest rates will be lower, which means people are going to be encouraged to spend more money. Why do we care about this, Y2K? Well, I made a video the other day talking about how every time we see a spike, maybe not every time, but a lot of times when we see these major spikes in retro game prices, they're somehow linked to the rise and fall of interest rates. And there is a YouTube, a retro gamer who has a YouTube channel. His name is Super Nintendo. And I think that guy is super smart and he's super analytical, far more analytical than I could be and far more detailed than I could be. And he did research of over 20,000 games, I believe, across varying consoles. And if you go watch his most recent video on the change in the retro gaming market in terms of pricing, he kind of does a better job of explaining how the Fed interest rates correlate to the prices of video games. And obviously, when we saw the massive price increase between 2021 and 2022, we know that a lot of that was linked to not only just, the change in interest rates, but it was also linked to the economic conditions at that time, as well as the conditions of society at that time. I think we were still, for the most part, in lockdown. There was a lot of social distancing. People still weren't really going outside, moving around, going out and about at that time. And so a lot of people were still in a place where video games were one of their main sources of entertainment. I think at that time, we were like going into kind of like a winter season. Things were getting colder. It's a little bit different now. We're heading into the summer season. The rules for the rules that we saw during the pandemic, as far as social distancing and things like that, have changed dramatically. I don't even think there's social distancing in play. And even now, if you test positive for the virus, I don't even think that the protocols are the same. I don't even think you need to like self-quarantine and things like that for as long as you did before. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because that means people have more options for entertainment, whether they're sick or not. Back then, that wasn't the case. If you were found to be sick, if you were found to have the virus, then you were pretty much stuck at home. And that was where video games came into play. Nevertheless, the fact that money is going to be a lot more accessible and people are, because it's all about, a lot of it boils down to sentiment and how people feel about the economy. And I think right now, and you can let me know down in the comments, if you're a retro game collector, if you're someone who buys video games, do you feel right now that it's things are tighter? Do you feel like it's harder to buy games? Do you feel like it's harder to find games? Do you feel like prices are still high, or do you feel like overall prices have dipped down? What's the overall sentiment where you are? Because I also know that where you're at in the country also plays a part in this, right? Like if you're in a major city, you may not have noticed much of a change, right? Because usually major cities have the highest prices for things anyway. Even if you look at things like fast food, there are certain parts of the country where you can still probably get a number one meal from McDonald's for under $10. But if you're in a major city, you could wind up paying up to 15, 16 bucks for a Big Mac meal, right? So where you're at in the country obviously impacts, how much you're going to pay for things in general. So I'm kind of interested to know what the retro collecting scene and what the video game collecting scene looks like near you. But I know that overall, with this change, I do believe we're going to see how it impacts collecting. And I do think that when the government, or when the Fed rather, makes changes to interest rates, it impacts the way people think about money, and it impacts the way people spend money. And I think that once people are in a place where money is a little bit more free flowing, people just might be a little bit more willing to spend more on video games. I know me personally, I've decided to slow down my collecting for personal reasons. I sold a lot of my collection for personal reasons. In fact, I'm actually going through some of the few Nintendo Switch games I have left, because I wound up selling 85% of my Switch collection. I think I have less than 50. I have less than 50 Switch games, maybe about 50 Switch games in my collection. Whereas at one point I was almost touching 400 Switch games. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of those games were games that I probably didn't need. I don't want to say that any of them were shovelware, but it was just excess. There was no way I was going to play through 400 Switch games and beat them all and thoroughly enjoy them all. It just wasn't going to happen. Especially when I have another 500 to 600 retro games across a number of different consoles. So it was good for me to get rid of that many Switch games and get my collection under 700 games. I feel like, having 1,000 or more games, at that point, you're really just building a library. I don't think anyone who collects more than 1,000 games truly believes that they're going to play and finish all of those games. But I do think, in large part, it's nice to have that library of games to be able to pick, whether it's in your basement or in your attic, to be able to go downstairs or upstairs and say, what do I feel like today? Do I feel like an RPG? Do I feel like a shoot 'em up, a beat 'em up? Do I want a racing game? And having that many games at your disposal is definitely a cool feeling. But when you're in a tighter economy, and I consider that a luxury, right? When you're in a tighter economy, luxuries like that are no longer top priority. So for me, my downsizing, a lot of it was personal reasons, but as I started to see the economy shift and change, I said, you know what? It might have been a good thing that I went ahead and kind of scaled back on some of that and kind of put those funds towards other things, like I'm thinking about getting my daughter piano lessons, to get her started in that direction. Obviously, piano lessons aren't cheap. Those cost money. I've also lost upwards of 20 pounds, right? So I'm aiming to lose 20 to 35 pounds, which means my wardrobe has to change and I need to get different clothes. And there's different things that we want to do. We obviously want to take vacation. We want to do different things. So when you start weighing the things that you want to do and your necessities against your video game collection and collecting, that's where the finance piece and the dollars and cents piece comes into play. But I'm interested to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments. Do you think that the Fed cutting rates and what it's going to mean for the economy will impact the retro collecting market? Do you think game prices will rise again and continue to rise higher, especially for rarer retro games? I'm really interested to know your thoughts. And if you're not sure, if you think this is, a reach on my part, like I said, stop by Super Nintendo, stop by his channel. He just put out a video not too long ago, which does an excellent job of explaining the price trends and the price changes over the last 4 years when it comes to the retro game collecting market. It's the Y2K Collector coming at you with another provocative thought in the morning. I'll be back with more videos today. Hope you had a good week, and hopefully you've got some great things planned for this weekend. I'll talk to you soon.